In NFL Week 7, you were happy if you risk it with Dante Foreman and Josh Downs. Who should you target in Week 8? The fantasy or the football guys DFS show has all your cash GPP plays for this week's main slate. And first, we're gonna, as always, welcome our DFS captain Devin Knotson. Devin, how are you doing?
You almost slipped the wrong company's name there, Jeff.
I don't even know where I was headed there.
There's about 30 of them that start with that.
Yes.
So, last week sucked. I have not been more wrong about a single thing than I was about Puka Nakua and Cooper Kupp last week. I was firmly in the camp that this was Kupp's offense, and Puka was just going to be this short check down valve. And boy, did I family's eating crow for dinner tonight. So
we get it every once in a while. We get those weeks that just remind us that we actually know nothing at all, and I think last week was one of those weeks.
yeah, it was one of those where like I took the calculated risk that Puka was like one of, if not the highest owned wide receiver, and I'm like, what if he was like the game before and just his role wasn't great? Turns out his role was awesome, and like he's going to be a guy that we're going to want to target going forward. But sometimes you have to be on a limb and stand out on a limb, and sometimes that limb breaks.
Yeah, completely agree. All right, let's move in. Let's go through the games of the week. What games are you targeting this week?
Yeah. So number of them. I guess. I mean, it's a weird slate because we have Kansas City, right, playing Denver, and I think that's like kind of the obvious play where most people are just going to immediately go to. But if I look at games that might be a little bit different, I sort of like what do we do with the 49ers defense? Because are they elite? Are they not elite? Can the Bengals put up some points? Because Sam Darnold is starting, and boy, is he cheap. So he's certainly intriguing. Um, yeah, I hear the
That
laughter.
that was going to be my. That was where I was going to take it.
Yeah, I think I think the Eagles and the Commanders could be interesting. The Eagles have struggled through the secondary, but you can't start Sam Howell because he might die this week.
Yeah.
Like he's literally on pace to break David Carr's sack record by like 15 sacks. It's not even going to be close. And how they can keep running him out there just for the health of him, I don't fully know.
Yeah, other ones I'm looking at, the Jacksonville offense, I think against that Pittsburgh defense, particularly the passing offense, has been exploitable. Dolphins, as always. Rams and Cowboys, I think that one has the potential to rack up some points there. Ravens against the Ravens look like they're rolling against the Cardinals, and then maybe quiet shootout potential would be the Colts and the Saints. I think that might be one that it could go either direction between defensive battle, but we saw what the Colts did last week against the Browns defense. That's another one that I played the Browns defense because I figured the Browns defense are very good and Gardner Minshew was very bad the week before. And of course they give up 40 points. So what are you going to do?
Yeah, it's a tough one. At least the Browns got the win.
All right, before we move on, let's make sure to take a minute to like this video and subscribe to the channel so you never miss an episode. Feel free to comment with your questions and on this week's slate, and we'll make sure to answer those as the weekend goes on. We're going to move into our cash game GPP or cash game plays at quarterback now, and tell me why I don't just go to the bottom and put Sam Darnold into my lineup at 4,300.
You could. I'm trying to take my bias off because I'm arguably the biggest Sam Darnold fan that there is. I don't think the guy's gotten a fair shake throughout his entire career. But Kenny Pickett's also 4,900, which is like the only other quarterback that I would consider in that range. Jacksonville has allowed 4 300-yard passers, including Gardner Minshew, Derek Carr. They did allow to Josh Allen and Patrick Mahomes, but like Derek Carr and Gardner Minshew, 3 straight games over 300 yards for Jacksonville. But I think you just take the 4,300 and you move on at Sam Darnold. I mean, at 43 to hit cash value, he needs 12 or 13 points. Like,
Right.
It's so low and there's so many options in that offense. Is he worse than Brock Purdy? Maybe.
I don't think so. I
Like,
mean, I don't think noticeably worse, and especially when it comes to what we're doing here in terms of fantasy production, I don't think it's noticeably worse. My only concern would be if Joe Burrow's not all the way healthy yet, and the Bengals are fine playing just a messy game that they want to keep it low tempo, slow going, and if the 49ers default to that with Darnold in as well. But I mean, we saw Monday night, Christian McCaffrey, you dump off to Christian McCaffrey can turn into 13 points very quickly. And so it just has that potential all throughout that offense. And this one, again, can go back and forth if the Bengals are clicking and the 49ers if Sam Darnold's fine.
yeah, I think the question we should all ask ourselves is who's giving out less medical information, the Bengals or the Browns, because something's going on in Ohio where we don't know the health of either of these quarterbacks. They're day to day, they look awful. Like Deshaun Watson's out again. There's no way I'm touching PJ Walker, obviously. The Browns haven't thrown a touchdown from a quarterback other than Deshaun Watson. So, um, yeah, I think you just take Darnold. I don't think you need to overthink this one for cash. For GPPs, you certainly can get a little bit crazier, but just take Darnold and move on. And I think that's going to be a trend this week that we fell into it last week too, where in cash games, some weeks can get very difficult because the overlap between, we're seeing 60, 70% rostered. Guys, I wouldn't be surprised if Darnold was 80% rostered this week. Like it
Yeah.
wouldn't shock me. So you're not really getting an advantage, and you really have to be careful with that in cash because, I'll tell you, it can come down some weeks. It can come down to 1 versus 1 or 2 versus 2.
One, it's so difficult too because if he has a 20-point game, I mean, you're cooked if you don't play him
Yeah.
because of the advantage that everybody else can build throughout their lineup. Because I don't love the middle this week of really anybody in the middle, and so it's in my mind it's either you pay up or you go with Darnold, and it's tough to pay up and with given what you can build with Darnold.
Yeah.
All right, let's hit running backs now. Where are you naturally landing at running back?
I think the obvious one, again, it's another guy who's going to be very popular, but it's Breece Hall at 5,900. Currently, we have him. I need to fix my roster projections. He's not showing up. But I expect he will be one of, if not the most popular plays this week. We've seen Breece Hall. He's now coming off a bye, but I think it's really him and Isiah Pacheco are going to be the two that I'm at least targeting at 59 and 61. But for Hall, I mean, we look at what he did before the bye, and he had 22 for 177 against the Broncos. He struggled a little bit against the Eagles, but the Eagles' run defense is pretty good. They're a pass funnel defense, so not all that concern there. He also added in 54 yards receiving, so I think he's a guy that look the Jets. I mean, they're what 3-3 somehow.
Yeah.
They still have playoff aspirations because Aaron Rodgers is convincing everyone he can come back from a torn Achilles, which is just hilarious. Then like they're gonna have to leverage Breece Hall, and he's like their only guy that they have because Dalvin Cook is. Are they trading him? It sure sounds like they're gonna take any pick that they can get for him, and at that point it's Hall's offense. So I think Hall's interesting. Pacheco. I mean, look, people have. I've been saying it all year. People have an what's the word? A unwillingness to play Kansas City running backs simply because what we've had to deal with for the last several years, as far as like Damian Williams, Darren Williams, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, there were a couple other guys in the Le'Veon Bell was there. Like there's other guy. We have this mindset where they're a committee backfield. They're really not. And like this is largely Pacheco's backfield taking on a Denver defense that they've been better, but they're without who suspended Simmons?
Kareem Jackson.
Kareem Jackson. Justin Simmons is questionable. Kareem Jackson is suspended. So both their safeties might be out, which is never ideal. And those are two run stopping guys for them. So I think that they're interesting. And then, just looking at a couple other guys that you could potentially play in cash this week. I'm just looking at my matchup chart for running backs who are in good matchups. And I mean, look, there's not a lot of value here. Like, we're going to talk. Some people might go to Kareem Hunt. I'm personally not, just because Seattle's run defense has been one of the best in the NFL. I think Damian Pierce is certainly intriguing against Carolina. Carolina's, I mean, it's hard to play Damian Pierce, but Carolina's run defense has been atrocious. They're allowing the second most fantasy points to opposing running backs. They've allowed five rushing touchdowns in their last 2 games. They've allowed 11 rushing touchdowns on the year. So through 6 weeks, they've allowed 11 rushing touchdowns, 13 touchdowns total to opposing running backs. Their pass defense is pretty good in Carolina. So, this is another game where it's probably going to be a little bit of a funnel, but
Yeah, I think that if you want to go that direction, though, I think you save it for a GPP and maybe you look at Devin Singletary at 4,400 because they split almost equally last time we saw them before the bye. They'd shifted hard towards Damian Pierce taking over that backfield, but then they kind of moved back and it went to almost a 50-50 committee. And so I think that they kind of saw they wanted to see Damian Pierce as the lead back, and they saw it and they decided you're not lead back, and so that's where I pivot off there on cash. I completely agree with you though, because Breece Hall and Isiah Pacheco are the two that stood out to me. I just don't feel comfortable in cash going below them. It just doesn't seem like anybody stands out. I mean, if you really wanted to risk it, Amari DiMercato, the way that he took over the backfield against for the Cardinals last week, but he's going against Baltimore, and so that's a terrible matchup, and so you don't want to go there in cash. And I don't think that there's really anybody else. And then like why it's almost one of those things where Breece Hall and Isiah Pacheco are in such a good spot. Why are you going to go up from them? I just don't. I think that's the natural landing spot.
yeah, I mean, going up, I think is hard because there's not. I
Yeah.
mean, McCaffrey, if you wanted to play him, I think he's always in play. Barkley, Mostert, Henry. Are we putting? I mean, no. Like, I'm just passing on a lot of these guys. Jonathan Taylor, I would say, is interesting. I think that 6,200 is a fair price. This could be the last time that we're going to see him at this low of a price. If you're looking to play a third guy, I think eventually he starts, and we saw it a little bit last week, where he starts to really take over in this backfield. 18 carries last week. So going down, there's just not a lot. I mean, you look at, I honestly don't know. I think that going down is risky this week. I think you'll see some three wide receiver builds. But at 4,300, maybe in cash, and we can talk about wide receivers and if there's enough value or if we just play Travis Kelce. But if we're starting at 4,300 with the quarterback, you could get away with finding a way to get McCaffrey in your lineup, and it wouldn't probably kill you. So, he's a difference maker, and he's a guy who, if you can build him in, we don't necessarily have, with Tyreek Hill banged up, Cooper Kupp's probably too expensive. We can probably just jump right into wide receivers.
Yeah.
But, realistically, there's not that top end at wide receiver this week either. Maybe it is Tyreek Hill. I'd love to hear your opinion on him.
That matchup against New England has always kind of proven tricky for Tyreek Hill, and so that's where I land there. And he's coming in with that injury. I don't know what's going on with the injury, because yesterday it seemed like Tua Tagovailoa had that press conference where he basically said we got to get used to him being out for a couple weeks, and then today he's back at practice, and just like the reports are, oh, he's fine, he's just doing his normal thing at practice. And so, well, okay, I don't know if there's some gamemanship that happened there with the Patriots on tap this week or what, but yeah, it's always been a tough matchup. And so, yeah, you move down there, and I think that there's a really meaty middle there that looks really nice. Like Adam Thielen at 6,600 is still that price that still isn't changing relative to the production that he's been putting up. Jordan Addison is a nice value, I think, at 5,700 because he had that big explosion on Monday night, but obviously that missed the pricing for the week, and so there wasn't a big adjustment off him. Christian Kirk at 5,900, we've seen him kind of step forward as being that Jaguars lead wide receiver. I just think there's so much value in that range that you can get a lot of production, and you can really fit a lot of guys with high upside into your lineups this week that do have some safety built into them.
Yeah. I think there's a couple guys that I just want to touch a little bit on. I think, to your point, Addison is He's the guy. He's how I play DFS. If the guy blows up on Monday, if his role changes, if we start to see a breakout, either in the Sunday night or Monday night game, the pricing's already locked for those slates, so they don't take it into account. I think that's a good call. Your guy. Can't believe you
Zay
didn't mention.
Flowers every episode. Got to mention Zay Flowers every episode. He's highlighted in my sheet. Believe me.
He's just a cash game. Like I don't love him ever for GPPs, but he's a guy who at 5,600 continues to produce, and going up against this Arizona defense that starting to play a little bit like we expected them to early on in the year, where they've lost 4 straight games by 10 or more points. They're starting to show that they might be the worst team in the NFL, and I think that that's interesting. One more guy that wasn't named that I really like in cash this week, $5,000, Deontay Johnson. And it sort of goes along with the Kenny Pickett thing where they've given up 300 passing yards for 3 straight weeks. I understand that Deontay Johnson hasn't scored a touchdown in like 4 years. We said that about Jacoby Myers like a year or two ago, and eventually Jacoby Myers figured it out, and eventually he started scoring touchdowns. Deontay Johnson scored 20 touchdowns in his first 40 or 45 games. Like, he's a guy who is their primary receiver. I won't listen to the George Pickens talk, but Johnson is the guy that I think could be intriguing a little bit this week. But it's a weird week in that. And then Josh Downs, I'll just throw it out there. I'm not going there. I think he'll be popular. I would rather play Deontay Johnson. 4,800 for a guy who, he had a breakout last week. 5 for 125. It was primarily set up by a 59-yard touchdown. Do we really trust that he is a guy who all of a sudden, can the Colts offense support Jonathan Taylor, a little bit of Zach Moss, Michael Pittman, and now Josh Downs with Gardner Minshew as their quarterback? I'm not there. I know that they just put up 38 points against the Browns, but I'm not going that route. I would rather go with a guy who I know is going to get the targets, and that's, the guys like Addison, Flowers, Deontay Johnson. If you wanted to spend up and you wanted to go A.J. Brown, I mean, he's on the world's hottest streak right now.
Yeah.
125 yards in 4 straight games. They're going to continue to feed him. They should be able to beat Washington pretty handedly. Jalen Hurts is dealing with some form of injury, some form of leg injury or knee injury, which could limit his rushing upside. So I think that the team is sort of rallying around this Brown breakout, and we're talking about records of most over 125 in a row or something. So I think that they're going to try and get him that.
Yeah, and I think that there's evidence to that on Sunday night because they were in a position that they could really grind the Dolphins down, and they took a deep shot to Brown to get him because he was sitting right about, I think it was close to 100 or so, and they took a deep shot to him, and that connected, that got him above that 125. So I think that they know that record's out there, and I think Washington runs man coverage. A.J. Brown eats man coverage alive, and I think he's going to be at 8,000. I think that's a great move there. Moving down maybe below that tier that I really like would be maybe Kendrick Bourne. We've seen it 2 weeks in a row. He's going to be chasing against the Dolphins for New England. It's maybe still a little bit risky for cash, but it is kind of seeming like he is emerging as Mac Jones' go-to wide receiver, but I don't know if Mac Jones' go-to wide receiver means a whole lot.
Yeah, in a normal week, I think I would agree, but there's just so many options like we talked about. I mean, there's literally 5 or 6 guys that I'd feel completely comfortable playing in cash. And do I want to lose money with Mac Jones? I'd rather be wrong about a guy like that I know is going to produce most weeks. Like, would it surprise anyone for Halloween if Kendrick Bourne turned back into a pumpkin? Probably not. So.
No. All right, tight ends. I think it's hard not to, given all the cost savings we talked about at other positions. I think it's hard not to just roll with Travis Kelce at 8,400. There's guys, like Dallas Goedert looks to be okay right now. It seems like they're factoring him a little bit more, but I don't know. I think you can save enough money elsewhere that Travis Kelce needs to be a staple in the lineup.
Yeah, I think the question you have to ask yourself is, I mean, look, you can probably afford Christian McCaffrey or you can probably afford Travis Kelce. FanDuel, you might be able to do both, but that's a different story. The The question that you have to ask yourself is $3,000 from, or I guess it's 3,800 from Kelce down to Goedert. Can you reinvest that 3,800 in the rest of your lineup and get the value or difference between Goedert and Kelce? I feel like it's point chasing a lot of it by taking Kelce, but I don't want to be wrong.
Yeah.
And I don't want to be on the wrong side because, we just talked about both their safeties potentially being out.
Right.
Kareem Jackson is a good coverage guy. He's one of their best that they have. They have very few guys that can cover Travis Kelce. On the road scares me a little bit just because of that mile high factor, but I just don't know that I want to sweat out at 325. Okay, I have a lead and my opponent has Travis Kelce. It's not a great reason at all, but sometimes just taking the free square or taking the block is the way to go. And he's the only guy that has that upside.
And yeah, I completely agree. And we saw it a little bit last week where the Chiefs were able to pull away from the Chargers, but it does feel like we are just due for a 42-14 Chiefs win.
Yeah, they're starting to look better. I would say that if you're not going that route, you could also look at Darren Waller. I think he's looked better.
Yes.
11 targets, 7 targets, 8 targets. And he'll be in my GPP section, but I think he's an excellent GPP play this week. He's turning into their number one receiver. And, a lot of people wanted it to be Wan'Dale Robinson, but you don't have a 5'6" wide receiver as your primary guy. So he would be interesting if you really wanted to go cheap. You could look at Dalton Schultz at 39, but I don't know. I think with there's so much value. Like we talked about 5 or 6 wide receivers who are between 5 and 6K. We talked about a $4,300 quarterback. Don't waste the savings that you get on Sam Darnold on don't waste it on these mid-tier running backs or these mid-tier wide receivers. Just kind of build a stars and scrubs lineup this week.
Yeah, I think it very much opens up for that. But make sure we're going to move on to GPP. But first, make sure to head to footballguys.com/plans to become a Hall of Fame subscriber. Hall of Fame subscribers get access to all DFS content for less than $20 monthly or $95 annually. All right, let's jump into GPPs on quarterbacks. Are you still considering Darnold a GPP play, or do you think that ownership is just going to crush that avenue?
It depends. It depends because right now it's low. And I think if it stays under 10%, 12%, right now it's trending about 5-6. I don't believe those numbers at all. I've actually had to bring my numbers down because I don't want to be the guy that's popping off at 14 when everyone else is at 4 or 5. So I brought it down to 8. But I think it'll be 14 or 15% at least. Could be higher. It's interesting. I think that at that rate, is he a bad play? I mean, again, if he gets 250 yards and 2 or 3 touchdowns, he's still a guy that you potentially might want to have. Am I going to go overweight and say, hey, he's a must play? No, but I'm certainly not going to fade him. There's enough differentiation that you can do elsewhere this week that you don't have to fade. You don't have. I would almost rather take Sam Darnold than I would Patrick Mahomes, even though the roster percentage for Darnold or Mahomes is going to be, probably half of what Darnold is. But I really think Darnold throws for 250 and 2, 250 and 3, and that's 250 and 2 is 18 points, which is 4.5x. That's plenty good enough on every single week of the year to take. I think if you wanted to take Kenny Pickett, I think he's fine. I think if you wanted to take Pickett's really lacked the upside, which is disappointing, but the matchup is really good and really attractive. I think Sam Howell is fine as well. We've seen some 300-yard games from him going up against the Eagles. You could stack that game coming back with AJ Brown or coming back with some of these Eagles guys. But the top end is just too expensive for me. I think it really limits you what you're trying to do. I would rather take a shot on McCaffrey. I'd rather take a shot on Kelce, AJ Brown, or some of these other guys, potentially even Tyreek Hill, because we talked about the matchup. We talked about the, people being afraid of the injury. Well, Tyreek Hill, whenever he's on the field, has that big upside. So
Yeah, and I'm always going to lay into the narrative, and I think that there are two different narrative games that you really could potentially play with. One would be that CJ Stroud and Bryce Young matchup, if you wanted to go with Stroud, or even if you wanted to get very risky and go with Bryce Young on the other side, as I think that there's maybe some rivalry going back and forth there, and maybe on Stroud's part a little bit of feelings about not being selected by Carolina. And then the other one would be if the guy could stop turning it over in the red zone, he probably wouldn't be priced where he is, but Desmond Ridder with Arthur Smith going up against Tennessee. Desmond Ritter's had a couple 300-yard games the last couple weeks. Problem is he just keeps fumbling it or intercepting every time that they're inside the 10-yard line. So that's frustrating because you're not getting the payoff on the pay dirt there, but he has shown himself to be able to accumulate some volume at 5,100.
Yeah, I like it.
All right, let's hit some running backs. Again, like Breece Hall and Isiah Pacheco just stand out to me in this slate relative to these running backs. But I mean, maybe on I mentioned DeMarcado earlier. That's a risky play, but he had the entire backfield. Darrell Henderson, maybe Darrell Henderson takes over, but he's going up against Dallas. It's like some of these matchups that these risky guys that you want to go on don't have good matchups.
Yeah, I think there's a couple guys that I want to throw out there, and I'll start safe, and I'll get a little frisky at the end. Jonathan Taylor, I think, is an excellent GPP play. Like I talked about, I think some people are still going to be scared off by the matchup, which isn't great, but last week wasn't either. And then some people are going to be scared off by the potential duel. The potential committee there in Indianapolis, whether or not it is a committee still, I don't know. Alvin Kamara going up against Indianapolis, he's been under the radar. I don't know why people don't really love to play him. Maybe it's because they're afraid of Taysom Hill or like he doesn't score touchdowns, but the guy has 12 receptions and 7 receptions over his last 2 games. And I think he had 13, 3, 7, 12. So, like, there's your touchdown is on a PPR site every single week, most weeks. Devin's being a little dramatic there, but most weeks he's going to get a touchdown simply by the number of receptions he catches.
Yeah, and so that upside is certainly there that he converts a couple of those into touchdowns. He's on pace. He missed 3 games, and he's still on pace to break the record for single-season receptions by a running back. So that tells you everything about what he's doing.
And we saw it last year, right, with Josh Jacobs and Derek Carr. Derek Carr has an affinity to throw to running backs. Josh Jacobs caught 60 balls last year, and he's on pace to catch 40 this year or something. So I think that's interesting. McCaffrey I already talked about. I think he's a good play. And I'll give one more before we get frisky. Kenneth Walker against Cleveland at home. What is the Browns' psyche at this point? Like, what are they thinking in that locker room? They came off a win, but was it a good win? No. Did they look good? Not really. How good is this defense? And that's the question we have to ask ourselves. A lot of people are just going to say, hey, it's a really good defense. But who have they played? So let's just go through the teams. Joe Burrow in a game in which he could barely walk. They lost to Pittsburgh, giving up 26 points. One dominant game that they had was against Tennessee. Baltimore scored 28. They beat the 49ers, who didn't look good against Minnesota, and then gave up 38 to the Colts. So they've given up 38 to the Colts, 26 to the Steelers, and 28 to the Ravens. Would it surprise anyone after 2 consecutive wins that going out to Seattle that they just lay an egg here? It's the Browns thing to do. Could Kenneth Walker score 2 touchdowns? I think he could. And then it's time to get a little weird. Bijan Robinson, $6,000. Just saying. we don't know why he didn't play. Like, none of the story makes sense. And then Arthur Smith comes out and triples down because he said, hey, we have 3 running backs in our room. We need to just ride the hot hand. Is he just blowing smoke? I don't know. I would think that as a coach, and if you're taking Bijan Robinson that early, this was a message game. It was a game, whether he had a migraine or not. Like, they clearly were out there to send a message to him. Why even keep him active if he's like actually has a migraine headache?
Yeah, you don't put him on the field if he's got a migraine headache. He doesn't stand out in the field as a wide receiver or get a carry at the end of the game. I mean, the story that I heard was that he was having a good time the night before, and the team was not happy about that. So
And he's not been all that great this year. Like, let's be honest, he had a great week 1, or was it week 2? But he's, over his last 3 games, 3.3 yards per carry, 2.8 yards per carry. I'm not going to count last week because he only had 1 carry, but like, I wouldn't be surprised if he comes out and has a committed week in practice this week. Just put it that way.
Yeah, I get that. And then maybe Gus Edwards was rolling. He was running back 2 last week in standard, but going against Arizona. So, I mean, that could be a matchup. He finds the end zone a couple times, but that's a deeper GPP play. But, I mean, it's only 5,500, and Breece Hall you can get at 5,900. So you're not getting a lot of savings there.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's hit wide receivers. I think that, so we talked about that tier, like that 5,000 to 6,000 tier before. And I think there's some pivots off that tier too that have high upside between Drake London sitting at 5,100, Nico Collins at 5,500. They're kind of in that range where if you want to build your roster in that direction on targeting receivers in those tiers, those are some natural pivots that I think have a good upside, good matchups.
Yeah, I would say the guy that you brought up earlier, Adam Thielen, is an excellent pivot off of that tier. 6,400. A lot of people aren't going to want to go up to that tier right now. I have him about 7%. So I think he's going to be a guy that should be higher rostered, I would say. I think that he should be in the 15 to 16% just because he has been that really strong guy. And he's very stackable with Collins, who's also going to be in that 7 to 8% range. Going back to a guy who, I'm always a guy who likes to pivot off of the guy who most people hate, and that's Cooper Kupp right now. I think Kupp is, 2 for 29 last week. His price didn't come down nearly as much as I think most would have liked, but going up against Dallas, some people might just completely be off of him. Cooper Kupp is matchup proof, and I'm going to slander Puka Nacua again because I'm going to have some fun, and I'm going to get in trouble. You could throw however you want against Pittsburgh's defense. They've allowed 5 100-yard receivers now. Like, they're just going to take the matchup. Dallas has a very good secondary with Stephon Gilmore, Jordan Lewis, and Deron Bland. But Cooper Kupp is significantly better than those guys. I think Puka is probably in line with those guys. So it could be a Puka week. Or it could be a Cooper Kupp this week. Jalen Waddle, especially if Tyreek Hill plays, is interesting just because we don't know how healthy Hill actually is. And what if he aggravates something early on? Right now, he's only going to be about 5% rostered. He is expensive at 7,500, which is the primary reason. And then just going down the list a little bit, as a deep play, I think KJ Osborne is fine. He looked like the better receiver in the Bears game back 2 weeks ago than Jordan Addison. So could it be, is Addison guaranteed? He's going to be the most popular guy. I have no question about that. I think Addison will get close to 30% rostered this week, and Osborne will be about 5%. So he has some big play potential. But yeah, I mean, it's a weird week because you have a lot of the. It's going to be very tempting just to fall into the same build of guys like Addison, Downs, Flowers, who I don't ever play Flowers. Like I said, I don't ever play Flowers in GPPs. AJ Brown, I think, will get popular this week. And then you have a lot of guys in the 5 to 8% range. So it's really important to see who might be the most popular players that you like. That I think it's okay to play one of these guys. So if you wanted to play Josh Downs or you wanted to play Jordan Addison, etc., I think it's fine. Just don't play more than one between Addison, Downs, Flowers as we stand here on Thursday night. I have to ask you one thing real quick,
Yeah.
and I know you're trying to like rush the show, and you're watching
I'm not
the Bills
rushing the show at all, man.
watching the Bills game in the background. I get it. Christian Kirk or Calvin Ridley, like we talked
Kirk,
about.
I think Kirk comfortably. I just think there's there's the neighbor narrative. I don't know if you've heard that, but apparently Trevor Lawrence, Christian Kirk, and Doug Peterson all bought houses like on the same block in the same neighborhood. So there's that going on. But it's I mean, the team has financial incentive to make it be Christian Kirk relative to Calvin Ridley, because if they sign Calvin Ridley long term, that increases the draft compensation that they have to give out. There's just a lot going on there that I think, and from what we've seen production wise, everything has leaned towards Kirk. That to the point that I think it's comfortably Kirk in my mind. I think Calvin Ridley's kind of served as more of he's got upside to go off, especially against Pittsburgh. I mean, it could be the exact same thing that we saw last week where we think it's all Cooper Kupp and then Calvin Ridley just goes nuclear against the Steelers defense that isn't covering anybody at all. And if that's the direction that you were headed and want to take it, I could see that for sure. And especially if you want to throw that dart in a GPP, because I'm sure everybody will be off of Ridley.
Yeah, I have him at 3% roster right now, which he has a 100-yard upside every time he touches the field. Now he also has 10-yard upsides, or 10-yard downside, I should say. So I think they're both really good plays in GPPs. I think that they're both certainly guys that you could target and stack with Lawrence or whoever.
Yeah, and a couple other names. I know Michael Thomas is a guy that you've liked in the past with everything that's going on with Chris Olave there, and obviously the getting arrested or whatever happened there for speeding, but then the sideline spat that we saw, and then we've seen huddles where Chris Olave is not involved and with the other skill position players. He's sitting there, Michael Thomas at 4,900. And then I mentioned Kendrick Bourne earlier. If you really wanted to go down and you wanted to bring back off maybe a Dolphin stack that you might do, Demario Douglas at 3,300 is scraping the bottom of the barrel there, and he seems to be getting a bigger role in that New England offense. Just a very, very cheap bring back if you wanted to go with the, play Tua and play Tyreek Hill.
Interesting. I like it.
Thanks, man. Tight ends real quick. The cheap one that stands out in my mind is Trey McBride at 2,800, but that's a terrible matchup against Baltimore, but that's dirt cheap. But again, I think that there's a lot of good value that, we mentioned Darren Waller. We talked about Goedert, Travis Kelce, obviously. Do you have other eyes on other guys through that range, or are you kind of just sitting at those top guys?
No, Waller's like my favorite GPP play this week. The Jets are allowing the second most fantasy points to opposing tight ends, so I think he's certainly a guy that needs to be considered. Meanwhile, Denver's allowing the fourth, so take Travis Kelce as you wish. Looking up one thing, so one name that could be interesting that not a lot of people are going to be on. Yeah, Connor Hayward for Pittsburgh. Filling in for Pat Freiermuth, and then I think the Jacksonville's allowing 64 yards passing to opposing tight ends this year. Taysom Hill and Foster Moreau had 83 yards last week. Kylan Granson had 67. Jonnu Smith had 6 for 95. Those are not good tight ends. Like Connor Hayward, he's the former running back, isn't he, from Michigan State?
He is, yeah. The son of Craig Ironhead Hayward.
Yeah. So I don't know. I think he's cheap enough, and he's not going to be on someone's radar that if you're trying to take a GPP play, why not?
Yeah, great. Let's hit our stacks now. Favorite stacks of the week.
Do you have one?
I like CJ Stroud and Nico Collins. I think is a natural stack in that game we talked about with the narrative, and then I think that the other one I would think would be Sam Darnold and Christian McCaffrey, if you just wanted to go that direction, because I do think that potentially lines up to be a stack if they're going to keep it a little bit more conservative with Darnold and use McCaffrey a little bit more in the passing game in that natural kind of don't put too much on Darnold's plate.
Yeah, I'll go Sam Howell, Terry McLaurin, and AJ Brown coming back. I think that this game could be a little bit sneaky. McLaurin is starting to show why they gave him the money that they gave him, 80 yards and 90 yards in 2 straight games. So I think that he's interesting. And then Trevor Lawrence, pick your wide receiver, and Deontay Johnson. I think that this could be a little bit of a sneaky shootout game this week.
Cool. All right. Next, we have discount plays of the week, and who you have on discount plays?
I mean, it's of course, I think Sam Darnold this week. So I'll try and find someone a little bit off the radar. I'm gonna go. Man, it's tough. Just in terms of like points per dollar, it's not really all that much of a discount, but I'm just going to reiterate the Jordan Addison point. I think 5,700, he should be 65 or 66. If you really wanted to talk about just like, I'm kind of breaking the rules here, but I don't really care. The other guys didn't even want to show up this week. So it's my show and I can do what I want. That's all I got.
All right. One that I'm kind of looking at, Odell Beckham at 3,800. And if you look at last week, they really made a point of getting him involved early in that game before it got out of hand. They wanted to kind of get him involved. And I think that it seems like Rashad Bateman is the odd man out. They've kind of cycled Nelson Aguilar through a little bit, but Beckham kind of seems as the guy that potentially is stepping up as that third option behind Mark Andrews, and with Zay Flowers going up against Arizona. I think that there's going to be multiple opportunities for Beckham to potentially find the end zone and to accumulate some stats there. But it was interesting last week early against Detroit how focused they were on getting Odell Beckham involved.
I do have one.
That's
more.
what
You have one more.
Yeah, go
Elijah Moore, 4,100.
Okay.
He's been PJ Walker's number one target, and
Yeah.
Amari Cooper didn't have a target in the first half last week. He had two receptions on 8 targets because they threw downfield to Cooper a lot. But Moore, they've been getting the ball. He has 7 or more targets in 5 of his 6 games. So if you're just looking for targets, hasn't scored a touchdown yet, but the Browns need a playmaker to step up.
Yeah, it's one of those that touchdown has to come at some point, but he has been very, very involved in the offense. All right, that's what we got this week. Devin, you got any parting words for the people out there? Just wish them good luck.
Good luck to your Bills as they're up 3-0 right now.
Yeah, it's we need this one. So thank you so much. Good luck, everybody, this week.